IG2. So again, welcome to this webinar. Our focus today is IG2, the risk assessment. So let me start by just sharing my screen. Okay, so outline. Today is going to be very simple. We will focus mainly on your questions. So we'll have the Q&A sessions. We did send an email asking you to send your questions in advance. We received some of those questions. If you are not able to send your question, don't worry, you can still type those in the chat box later on. So what we will do is we will just go through your questions one by one, and we hope that this session again will be helping you. For those of you who will be submitting your risk assessment soon, and even for those who are not yet submitting, we hope that this will help you. What's going on in my screen? Did I do that? Okay, let's stop share first. Then share again. Okay, so before we begin the question and answer session, quick reminder, what is Unit IG2? What are the learning outcomes, which means at the end of this unit, once you completed the Unit IG2, what is expected from you? You should be able to do a risk assessment in your workplace that includes profiling and prioritizing risk, inspecting your workplace, recognizing a range of common hazards, evaluating risk and taking into account the current control, and recommending further control measures and planning action. So have this in mind when you complete your Unit IG2. These are the points that you should be able to do at the end of your review. Now, next, assessment criteria. So once you complete your Unit IG2, how do we assess that you really achieved, that the learning outcomes were achieved? This is assessed through a risk assessment. So you have to produce a risk assessment of a workplace, ideally your own workplace, and you need to consider a wide range of hazards. You have to take this from element 5 to 11 from the syllabus, and your risk assessment should meet best practice standards, suitable and sufficient. What is suitable and sufficient? It's one of the points that is discussed in element under Unit IGC1 under element 3. Okay, so stages, just again, quick reminder, if you go through the risk assessment, it is divided in different parts or stages. So you have part 1. Part 1, which is the description of the organization and methodology used. So this is where you describe the organization, and then you also talk about how did you complete the risk assessment. Part 2 is the risk assessment table, where you need to identify a specific number of hazards, minimum of 10 hazards, that should cover at least 5 categories. And then part 3 is where you need to select 3 actions, and you need to justify why did you select those 3 actions using arguments such as moral, legal, financial, likelihood and severity, and how effective the controls will be. And part 4 is a review. When should the risk assessment be reviewed? Communication, who needs to know the risk assessment and how we're going to communicate it. So we had the previous webinars where we discussed each one of those parts. So have a look at that. And also in our previous webinar, we went through the new form because NEBOSH updated the risk assessment form. We say that there are no major changes. It's just more on the format rather than the content. So we hope that you can also have a look at that previous webinar. It's available on Trainovate YouTube channel. Okay, so let's go straight to the question and answer part. So first question that we received, GC2 says I must mention 5 hazard categories in my risk assessment. Can I stick only in one element? For example, element 5, because element 5 contains 6 hazard categories. Yeah, so the answer is yes. The requirement says you need to mention 10 hazards and at least 10 hazards, and those 10 hazards should cover at least 5 categories. So if you look at the different type of categories, so from element 5 to element 11, these are the list of categories. This table was taken from the NEBOSH IG2 guidance. So you can have access to this document through the NEBOSH website if it was not sent to you already by your learning provider. So if you look at element 5, for example, you have different categories, several categories. You have noise, vibration, radiation, mental ill health, violence at work, and so on. So yes, if those are the main hazards that you have in your workplace, then it's okay. Noise is one category, vibration is another category, and so on. So the answer is yes. Next, what would be wrong? Before I forget, what would be wrong is to mention all hazards related to noise. Noise is one category. You need to cover at least 5 categories. It cannot be all noise. You need to cover other categories. Okay, next, I'm preparing a draft of risk assessment for the assembly and installation works of temporary facility. Is it suitable since it is our current activities in the project? Yes, the answer is yes. You can focus in any activity. It's never about the activities. It's about the hazard and the control. Meaning you're not failing because you selected the wrong activity. It's not about that. We assess you on the way you assess. You identify the hazard, the controls. Is it suitable and sufficient? So yes, you can select any kind of activity in your workplace, even temporary facilities. Next, my site has 500 plus workers, but it is distributed in different activities. Major activities in the sites are excavations, construction of wall perimeter for gardens, and stone cladding for the said wall. Okay, first question for the assessment number of personnel. Can I be more specific and only write the number of personnel involved in a specific activity? Like stone cladding. Okay, so if I understand, the organization is quite large, but the question here is, can I just focus on specific activity? Now, it's no. No in a sense like the part 1 of the risk assessment requires you to describe the organization. When you describe the organization, it's the entire company. You're not just focusing on specific activity. So this is what I mean. So this is part 1. You need to describe what's the name of your company, site location, number of workers. So the number of workers here is not just the worker who are involved in a specific activity. It's the entire company. So think about it, roughly 500 workers. And then describe the organization generally. So up to now, we focus on the organization, not just part of the activity of the organization. Then on the description of the area to be included in the risk assessment, this is where you define the scope of the risk assessment. So I'm not going to assess the entire company with all the activity going on in the company. I'm just going to focus on a specific activity. So the first question, which says, let me go back to the question, can I just focus on the workers doing that activity? No, you need to describe the entire company. That includes the total number of personnel. And then question number 2, since there are several activities, can I specify one activity from start to finish, like construction of butterfly gardens, wall, perimeter, from installation of reinforcement bars to stone cladding of the wall? Okay, the activity is very specific, but the question is, can I focus on one specific activity? The answer is yes. But this is what we are saying. In the description of the organization, it's the entire organization, and then you need to define the scope of the risk assessment. Scope of the risk assessment would be one specific activity or one specific area if you want. Or you can also assess the entire company if you want, but it's not really advised since we only need 10 hazards. So I hope that was clear. So describe the entire company, and then for the scope of the risk assessment, you can focus on a specific area or a specific activity. Okay, next, since we are under the Saudi Aramco standards, can I also use as reference the Saudi Aramco general instructions aside from the British agencies for further controls or action? Yeah, the answer is yes. Even if you're not using the British HSC, even if you're using other standard, that's okay also. But in this case, we are referring to part 1, which is the methodology, risk assessment. In this part one, underline, you have to talk about the sources of information consulted. So as a source of information, you can mention different standards. You can mention the Saudi Aramco standard, the HSC standard, OSHA standard, different type of standard. It's okay, no problem. So this is part one, which is different from part three, where you need to mention specific legal requirements to justify the actions that you selected. In part three, we said it must be only ILO. Okay, next. So let me just go through the question first, and later on I'll check the chat box if you have additional questions. So is it appropriate to include COVID-19 as one of the identified hazards under IG2 element 8, health, welfare, and work environment? This one is kind of yes and no. Yes and no, because yes, we can include COVID-19, but is it going to be under element 8? No, not element 8. I would put it under element 7, because if you look at element 8 is health, welfare, and work environment. And if you look at the topics discussed under element 8, it's more about the welfare facilities, and then for the work environment, something about the extreme temperature and so on. But since COVID-19 is related to viruses, I would put it more under element 7, because under element 7, this is chemical and biological agent. This is where I discuss about virus. So put it under element 7. And COVID-19 is not the hazard. What would be the hazard in that case? Chat box. COVID-19 is not the hazard. What would be the hazard? The hazard would be the virus itself. So which one? Could someone type in the chat box? Because COVID-19 is the name of the disease. The hazard would be what's causing the disease, which is the name of the virus. What is that? Yeah, anyone? Because if we go back to the definition of a hazard under our syllabus, it says anything that has the potential to cause harm. So coronavirus, yes. SARS-CoV-19, okay, yes. Okay, so just between brackets. So going back to the question, yes, you can talk about COVID-19, but put it under element 7, because this is where you discuss about virus, and the hazard would be the virus itself, which is SARS-CoV-2. Next. Can I consider adverse weather conditions, sandstorm, fogs as additional hazards under element 8, since working in a remote area, desert area? Yes, the answer is yes. Why element 8? Because that's the most appropriate one. If you look at the list of hazards, you cannot put it under 5, it's not 6, 7, so 8 would be appropriate. Something related to weather condition, that would fall under the work environment. So yes. Next question on the section of specific legal arguments, can we put ILO conventions and codes of practice together? The answer is yes. Although the requirement is or, so it's ILO convention or codes of practices or ILO recommendation. If you want to put both, no problem, as long as there's at least one of those. So we are talking about this section, by the way, part 3. This is where you select your action, 3 actions, and for each action, you need to justify using specific legal argument. The legal arguments must be taken from ILO. It can be an ILO convention, ILO recommendation, ILO codes of practice. So you want to put both convention, recommendation, codes of practice, no problem. Okay, next question in the section of methodology. Should I be specific to include the positions of the persons whom I ask permission to view incident records and medical records? Or is it possible to just put in general, like prominent persons in charge of health and safety issues? No, you don't need to put specific position for this one. We are talking about this section, by the way. So this is the risk assessment methodology. What is required here is source of information consulted. So these are the documents, but also who did you talk to? It could be workers. And in the case of the question, he is asking, he consulted also medical records, so he talked to some people. Is it required to really specify their position? No, it's okay. Because if you look at the sample, who you spoke to here is like you did an inspection, or maybe you talk to the people doing the job, like workers or the people who are involved in the job. That's what we are focusing on. But you want to have something extra, like you also want to include the people who are in charge of the medical record. It's not really required, so no need to put specific position for that one. Okay, question, I think this is the last one. Of all the questions that we received, some of the questions were addressed before, but I still included some of those in the slides. So last question was, is it confirmed that word count in some sections of IG2 risk assessment is only a recommendation, meaning not really necessary or required? Answer is yes, it is confirmed. Where can we find this? In the NEBOSH IG2 guidance. It says that the word counts should be used as a guide only and should not be seen as an absolute minimum or maximum. So yes, you can exceed, it's just a guide. It's not a requirement. Where can we find the word count? For each section, you will see a recommendation. Like for example, here in part 3, it says specific legal requirement 100 to 150 words. Likelihood and severity 75 to 150 words. So these are just recommendations for you to have an idea how long should the paragraph be. But it's okay if you don't reach the word count or if you exceed it, it's okay, no problem. All right. So any other questions? So now is your chance to ask questions. Your question could be either totally different question, or you want to go back to some of the questions already discussed. That's fine. So kindly type your question in the chat box so that we can go through them. Okay, so I'm checking now if we had questions already. Okay, when assessing contractor workshop within the company, what are the important things to highlight in the assessment? What do you mean, John? I do not understand the question. When assessing contractor workshop within the company, to highlight in the assessment? Well, the assessment is very clear because the assessment says that it's a risk assessment. So you need to identify hazard. So if you are assessing your contractor workshop, then you need to identify hazards. If there are many hazards, I would suggest focus on the main one. So at least 10. As far as our risk assessment unit IG2 is required, we need to provide 10 hazards and then control. So important things to highlight in the assessment. I don't really understand the question, John. You may have to clarify that a little bit. What could go wrong about the IG2 assessment? What could go wrong? What could go wrong? Based on previous papers that I've seen, what could go wrong? The main important part is the risk assessment table. So what happened before is some people forgetting to complete all the sections. So make sure you double check. If there is any empty section, like you think that there is no additional controls required, just put non-applicable. Don't leave the space, don't leave it empty. Put something non-applicable or no controls needed. Just write something. So I think that's the most important part, the risk assessment table. Make sure you have at least 5 categories. What could go wrong is for people who miss to identify 5 categories. Maybe they only provide 4 or 3 categories. And then also on the number of hazards, if you don't reach 10, so make it 12 or 13. Don't provide 20, that's a little bit long. So focus on the number of hazards, the categories, make sure you put everything is complete. For example, on the first column, you have hazard category and hazard. Make sure you write both, because if you only put the hazard, there's no hazard category, that's something wrong, something is incomplete. So make sure you put hazard and hazard category. Make sure you have every column completed. Also, what could go wrong? Sometimes controls are not really clear, or it's not enough, or it's not suitable and sufficient. So what could go wrong? It's about the hazard, it's about the control. Another thing also very important is part 3, when we talk about the selection of action and then justification. That could also something that can go wrong, specifically when you justify each actions. You need to provide clear argument, the moral, legal, financial, and then you have the laws, and then you have the severity and the likelihood. So you have a very clear format, you have a very clear form. The way they present it is to make sure that you won't miss anything, because you will see clearly right away if there's any empty space. So just go through the form, make sure everything is completed, then it should be okay. What else? Okay, what are other examples of relevant information? Part 1. Just like I said, everything that is required is already clearly written on the form. So part 1, for example, is the description of the organization. So you must mention the number of workers, you must describe the activity of your organization, you must mention the location, you must mention the name. So these are the minimum. So just stick with that. These are important information. Everything that is written on that form is important. Any other relevant information, that one is optional. If there's none, then just leave it as it is. Don't stress yourself too much if you don't have anything to put under that section, any other relevant information. Just leave it, just say there is no other relevant information. Or if you really have no idea what do you mean by relevant information, you can always go back to the sample provided by NEBOSH. Okay. Yes, next question. In ILO legal requirement, do we need to provide at least one from the convention, protocol, COP, or are we going to provide all the relevant references? An example is ventilation. You do not need to provide all the relevant references. We just need at least one reference to justify or to convince management that the action that you selected is important, because based on the ILO convention, it says that I don't know, equipment must be provided with machine guard, for example. So just need one. We just need one relevant reference. You don't need to put all of them. So one per action, one specific legal requirement per action. On the assessment table, what if I put the assessment on a different category? Like the first question about COVID, it was put under health and welfare instead of under hazardous standard. Okay, what will happen if you put a hazard on a different category, on the wrong category? I can't really say what will happen. Is it, are we going to fail or not? We've seen students who fail because of that. The assessor mentioned in the feedback that some of the hazards were not in the right category. So we've seen that before. There was previous cases where someone failed just because of the category. So this is why I think this is also important. Make sure you write the hazard to the right category. Okay. So I cannot really say what will happen, but I can say it happened before that someone failed just because of category and hazard. Okay. Will it happen again? I cannot say, I cannot tell. So just be safe, make sure you have the hazard in the right category. When doing risk assessment for IGC2, it must be specific as per the specific activity or general. Risk assessment must be specific. Yeah. They have a specific activity, so it must be specific hazard, specific control. So risk assessment must be specific, otherwise it won't be suitable and sufficient. There's no changes or revised for risk assessment format. There is, but I don't know if you are referring to the last one or the new one, but anyway, recently, early December or November, I think NEBOSH made some changes, and we covered those changes already in one of our webinars, the previous one regarding IG2. So have a look at that webinar. We went through the sections one by one, and we mentioned what are the changes. And once again, it's not really big deal. The changes are more on the way we present the answer rather than the content. So This new format should have been sent to you already by a learning provider. You can also download it from the NEBOSH website, okay? My company consists of 16 jack-up barges to support offshore well activity. Should I include the total worker or just the worker in the barge which I am assigned? This worker, are they all working for your company or not? You need to include the total number of workers working for your company. That's the description of the organization. So these people on the 16 jack-up barges, are they all working for the same company, your company? If yes, then include all of them. And then later on in the description of the area to be assessed or the scope of the risk assessment, you may just select to focus on one of those jack-up barges. If you cannot find 10 different hazards in one jack-up barges, then mention 2 or 3 or 4. It's up to you. So you can extend the scope of your risk assessment if you think that you cannot find the minimum number of hazards required. So total worker of the company, not total worker on one specific activity. Okay, in the risk assessment part, the existing controls that we are doing, is it possible if the further control measures is to eliminate or substitute the existing control itself as it is not suitable? Okay, so if I understand the question, there are existing controls already, but you think they are not suitable. So on the additional control or further control, you want to change it, eliminate it. Okay, yeah, that's fine. No problem. Okay, for example, PPE, they were doing some work and they are having dust masks as respiratory protective equipment. You think dust masks are not appropriate, so you want to eliminate, you want to change that to something more appropriate? Yes, no problem. I want to understand more about the legal arguments. Where can we find this ILO convention, recommendation, and codes of practices? This can be found on the internet, ILO website. A quick Google search will take you to ILO website. If you just type ILO conventions, you will be able to reach the ILO website. And from there, they have a list of convention recommendations. So a little bit of research is required here. It's not hidden. I don't know if anyone could paste the link going to ILO website. Maybe we can do that later. But yes, you need to do some research, but you can find it. Okay, I mean, all risk hazard in the workshop should be addressed to contractor manager in charge for compliance, to responsible person in charge for health and safety in the company. Okay, this was a continuation of the question regarding contractor workshop. Yeah. So do you need to address all the risk and hazard? The requirement for the IG2 risk assessment is 10 hazards covering 5 categories. So it does not mean all, as long as you mention minimum 10, don't mention 20, so 10, 12, 13, 14, yes, but not all. Just for the sake of this exam, you don't need to address all their hazard. If they have many, just focus on the most important one. Okay, and then the question also says, should we address it to contractor manager in charge of compliance or to responsible person in charge for health and safety in the company? It's up to you to decide. If you have a certain action, are you going to address it to the contractor manager or are you going to address it to the contractor health and safety responsible person? It's totally up to you and it's totally up to the setup that you have in your company. So this refers to a responsible person for each action. You decide if you are going to refer it to the contractor manager or to the contractor personnel, like maybe they have a health and safety manager or so on. So you decide, as long as there's a responsible person for that action. In addition to my question, during my first IG2 exams, I indicated only the number of workers on the barge that I'm assigned. Should I rectify it or just concentrate on my mistake, which is the methodology only? Okay, if this is your second take, you should have received a feedback from the examiner. So what I would do is just go through that feedback and focus on the points that were mentioned in the feedback. If they did mention anything in the number of workers, then okay, I'll rectify it. Okay, yeah, because as an examiner, we don't really know if the number of workers that you mentioned in your paper is correct or not. So we cannot really say you failed because you only mentioned 15 workers instead of 200 workers. But what I really explained is the requirement. What do they want in this risk assessment? In the description of the worker, description of the company is considering the entire company, the number of workers as a whole, not just focused on a specific activity. So in this case, go back to the feedback provided by the examiner and then focus on the points mentioned in the feedback. Okay, next. Confined spaces under element 8. And it has different hazards. An example of those are hazardous substances, fire. This can be found on the other element. Where shall I include them if it is like that? Where is your focus? What is your focus? Are you highlighting the confined space or are you focusing on the hazardous substance? I would put it under confined space since it's a confined space and then you are talking about hazardous substance inside the confined space, possibility of fire inside the confined space, I would put it under confined space. So it depends on the perspective, I guess. It depends on what is your focus on the hazard. Are you focusing on the confined space or are you just focusing on the hazardous substance or fire? Yeah, maybe that's not really clear, but I would put it under confined space, element 8. Unless, now I'm thinking, unless if the activity that you are focusing is cleaning a tank or cleaning a vessel, that's the activity, that's already a confined space. And then that's the activity, that's the scope of the risk assessment, is to do a risk assessment for a confined space entry. That's the activity. Now we need to find 10 different hazards covering 5 categories under that. So yeah, that would be different. You have hazardous substance, you have fire. So you will put it under hazardous substance, you'll put it under fire, and so on. So it depends on is confined space the activity that you are assessing, or is just one of the hazards that you identified in the scope of risk assessment. So yeah, clarify these. So let me repeat. So it depends if confined space is one of the hazard or one of the hazardous activity under the scope of risk assessment. That's fine. Or is it really what you are focusing on? The scope of the risk assessment is the work inside the confined space. That's different. Okay, thank you, Rederick, for posting the link for ILO website. Next question in part 1, if we retake the IG2 exam and did we only focus on the comment that we meet not trigger the requirement, and also in part 1 general description about product manufacturer provided type of activity and shift pattern, did okay to put the shift pattern or any other relevant information? Yeah, okay, put it under any other relevant information, that's okay. Okay, so an example of relevant information could be the shift pattern, or who do you think is responsible for health and safety in the organization? What I would always suggest is go back to that sample provided by NEBOSH and check what did they put under relevant information. I'm not saying copy paste from that sample, but it will give you an idea on what kind of information should I include under relevant information. Check the sample provided by NEBOSH. Okay, so I agree with Dave. Some hazard category are also included in some categories. So how do we know where to put them? For example, the faulty electrical system might cause fire, so where it will be, fire or electricity, electric. What is the hazard? Hazard is faulty electrical system. Tell me first, what is the hazard? And it will give us an indication what is the hazard category. So Dennis, what is the hazard first? And from that, we will identify what is the hazard category. So for example, defective equipment, defective electrical equipment. That's the hazard. We are not going to put that under fire. Why? Because it's an electrical equipment, so we'll focus more on electricity. And then under how people might be harmed, we can mention it can cause electrocution, but it can also cause fire. So you see, it's all covered. So how are we going to identify the right hazard category would be first, you need to identify what is the hazard, and based on that, you look at the hazard category and then you decide which one is more appropriate. I think that would also answer the question regarding the confined space a while ago. What is the hazard first? So if it's faulty electrical system, so it means the focus here is on electricity. So that's under electrical category. And then later on, you can still mention fire when we talk about who might be harmed. How can people be harmed? They can be harmed because it can cause fire. They can be harmed because it can cause electrocution. Okay, so following the confined space, chemical cleaning is the scope, and confined space is one of the hazard itself. So I can list confined space as one of the hazard category, and then I can count hazardous substance again in another column. Yes, that's correct. Okay, okay, so electric hazard, and then you can say it can cause fire. Is that it? Any other questions? Again, let me know if some of the answers are not really clear. This is why I really like you. Maybe we can do this again in the future. Send the question in advance so that I can also really think about the answer and provide clear slides, make the answers more clear. So next time we will do this again, and we will ask you in that case to send your questions in advance to also allow us to give you the clearest answer. So are there any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, for the oxygen, it can cause fire and explosion, so it will be under fire. Yes, yes, that's correct. Okay, anyone else has got questions? While waiting submission, for those of you who are submitting soon. Okay, so last date of submission, February 5, midnight, I think, Jovi, midnight. Send it to elearning at trainovate.com.ph, PDF, not Word format, it must be in PDF. And then file name, just include your name and then student number. Give us some time to receive your risk assessment, and also to reply, sending you an acknowledgement email that we received your risk assessment. So this date is only applicable to those of you who are already registered and who will submit your risk assessment this February. Okay, for the IG1, can I send the exam when I'm done? Is it the 1 or the 2? Then is 1. Send when I'm, yes, you have a window of 24 hours to complete the exam. But if you complete it in 2 hours, it's okay. You can submit right away, as long as you don't exceed the 24 hours. So yes. And NEBOSH says that based on their calculation, the way they designed the exam is it can be done in 4 hours, 4 hours straight. So if you can finish it in 4 hours or even less than that, you can submit it already. Okay, anything else? How do we send the risk assessment that you've done? Risk assessment must be submitted to your training provider. So on the screen, you see the information. Now, risk assessment must be provided to training providers such as Trainovate or your learning provider, and then training provider usually upload it on, there is a platform, there is a system, NEBOSH system, we just upload it to NEBOSH. We are not checking anything, and then NEBOSH will be receiving it, and they will be the one assessing the examiners to mark your papers. Okay, so for the IG1, there's a NEBOSH exam platform. So you upload it directly to NEBOSH. For the risk assessment, you must send it to the training provider, who then will upload it to the system, and then that's how NEBOSH will receive it. So this is why it's PDF, because we are not changing anything. We are not rewarding your risk assessment. Once you submit, that's it. That's final. How to secure student number? Is it given to the student when registered for the exam? Maybe Jovi can answer this question. Student number. Jovi? Okay. Jovi has got some...
For the student number, they will receive the email from NEBOSH.
Okay, so student number, normally you should have received an email from
NEBOSH. They will receive an email from...
Yes, you have received an email from NEBOSH. This is to confirm that you are registered for the unit or for the exam. On that email, you will see your student number. So that's the student number that you will include in the file name. Student number is also required in the risk assessment form. Somewhere down in the form, you have to write your student number. If really you don't know your student number, you can always ask with the training provider. So send an email to Jovi if you don't know your student number. Maybe she can help. Yes, so we don't need to send it to NEBOSH alone. It's a training center will do it. Yes, for the risk assessment, you need IG2. You have to send it to the training center. Okay, any other questions? How about retaker? Should you receive an email from NEBOSH again for confirmation? Jovi, how about retakers? Do they receive email from NEBOSH again for confirmation?
Wala po. Wala po yung email from ano.
Yes, Jovi? So if you are, Jovi?
Ma'am, for the IG2, ma'am, they will not receive the email for confirmation.
Okay, so Jovi is telling us that there is no confirmation email for IG2. That is for new and retaker, is that it? So if they are new or if they are retaker, there is no confirmation email from NEBOSH?
For the EEC, ma'am.
Jovi, we are losing you, so let's just, can you just type your answer in the chat box? Thank you. Because we can hear clearly. All right, anything else? Is it a must to make the assessment as per sequence of the assessed activity? No, it's not. It's not a requirement to assess as per sequence of the activity. No, as long as, again, you mention the number of hazards, it's okay. Yes, the student number that we receive from IG1 is the same student number that we will use in IG2. Yes, same student number. So if you receive that confirmation email for IG1, then that's going to be your student number. You will also use that for IG2. Okay, for the interview, can we ask for our own schedule? This is referring to the closing interview for IG1. Yes, what we did is, maybe Jovi, yes, you can ask for your own schedule. We provided some time slot, time and date, and inform us when are you going to be available, and we will include that on the schedule. So communicate with training provider, with Jovi for that. But how do we say that? Make sure you communicate to us the soonest, because it's first come, first serve. So if you say, I want to get the interview on a Sunday afternoon or a Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, if the slot is already taken, then we may have to reschedule again. So first come, first serve. So communicate with Jovi as soon as. Yes, Jovi. Okay. Yes, so Dennis, just communicate with Jovi. If we are retaker, are we using the same student number? Yes, same student number is the same. even if you're a retaker. Yes, through email. Communicate to Jovi through email with regards to, is that it, Jovi, through email for the closing interview?
Yes, ma'am. I sent them an email, ma'am.
Yes, so we send the available schedule for closing interview through email already, right, Jovi? To all of the registered students, have we?
Yes, ma'am. Some of
Yes,
them they are reply on my email.
yes. So, okay. So some of you have received that schedule already. Okay. Okay, another question. So going back to hazard category, so example, I select electricity for hazard category, then I will mention at least 10 hazard of electricity. Is that correct? Now, the total number of hazard is 10. So you have to, maybe for electricity, you mention 1, 2, or 3, but not 10 hazard of electricity. Because if you mention 10 hazard related to electricity, that's only one category. We need at least 5 categories. So you divide the 10 hazard, minimum of 10 hazard among 5 categories. So for example, I think I'll just go back to this one. So these are the categories we have. So for example, 1 for noise, maybe 2 about vibration, maybe hazardous substance 3. So how many so far? I have 6. So that's only 3 categories so far because I mentioned noise, vibration, hazardous substance. I need 2 more categories. So maybe I will include fire, that's 1 more. Maybe I will include electricity. So that's 5 categories. So the total number of hazard is 10 because I have 1 for noise, 2 for vibration, 3 for hazardous substance, that's 6 already, 4 for fire, that's 4 category, and 1 more for electricity. I have 11 hazard and I cover at least 5 categories. So I hope it's clear. It doesn't mean that you need to provide 10 hazards for each category. No, you need to provide a total number of 10 hazards divided among 5 categories. So these are the minimum. You can put more category, more number of hazards if you want, but minimum is 10 hazards covering at least 5 different categories. Yes, the request should be communicated with the same email address. Yes, just reply to that email, Dennis, when it comes to the schedule for the risk for the closing interview. Okay, so if you have student number for IG1, yes, you have a student number already. That's the student number you will use for IG2. Student number is only 1 for both units. Okay, what else? Anything else? Okay, so Ryan did not receive his student number for email. Again, just communicate with Jovi. The email is e-learning. Okay. I show that slide again, the last one. So e-learning at trainovate.com.ph. This is where you can contact Jovi. This is for submission, but also if you have questions regarding student number or also the closing interview. Yes, we've sent you, I think Jovi sent you an email with the available schedule already, date and time. So just pick up one. If you really cannot make it with those provided date and time, communicate with Jovi. Let's see if we can arrange other dates. Okay, any other questions? Time check, it's almost 5 o'clock. We had 1 hour for these webinars. If you do not have any other question, then I think we are going to close for today. We wish you good luck for your NEBOSH exam for the, oh, there's a question. If I pass IGC1 and fail for IG2, what would be the consequence? Well, if you fail one unit, then you need to retake that unit again. So if you pass IGC1, so that's good. So you have IGC1 already, and fail IG2, you need to retake, meaning you have to revise your risk assessment and then submit it again. And there is always an exam fee. Every time you retake an exam, you need to pay the fee again. So make sure you pass the first time. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Alan, for giving us information about the available schedule for the closing interview. Okay, so with that, again, hi, there's another question. So, okay, so keep asking questions. Any doubts, anything that is not clear, now is the time. Now is the only chance to ask questions. So keep asking questions. It's okay. The feedback I received was on methodology, but about the discussion of number of employers earlier, I just put the actual number of workers that we have on our. Can I just revise it? Yes, you can revise it. It's okay. So it's okay, Renz, if it's like 15 and now you're going to change it to 100, it's okay. But again, you have to look at it as a whole. Are you describing only one badge, or maybe you're mentioning that there are 16 badges in your company and there are only 10 workers? Maybe that's not going to be really realistic. So are you describing the entire company, including the 16 badges, or just focusing on one? So which one? Make sure it's realistic. Okay, Dennis. Okay, thank you. So for Renz, so my advice, focus on the comments from the feedback. But if we go back again to what is required, so just to make it simple, describe your entire company, including how many workers we have, what are you doing in your company, and then for the scope of risk assessment, focus on one specific area or specific activity. Okay, so Renz, to make it clear, so focusing on one bar, that is going to be the scope of your risk assessment. But your company is handling how many badges? 16. Okay, so mention that in the description of activity or description of the organization. So my company is one large company who is handling 16 badges. And then later on, the scope of this risk assessment is only on badge number 1 or something like that. Very clear, Renz. Okay, so one question about IG1. What preparation do we need to do before the day? Sleep? Sleep early? And pray? Okay, so preparation, make sure you have your notes ready. Double check for internet connections. This is important. Preparation before the day, because if you're in the Philippines, you will have access to the exam at 4 p.m. So on that day, make sure double check your device, the one that you're going to use to access the exam. Double check internet connections. Also, make sure way before the exam, you have a look at the platform, get familiar with it. You won't be able to access the exam question yet, but at least you will be familiar about where to do what, how to use it, and so on. So I think these are the important preparation. And your resources, make it ready, make it organized so that you won't spend too much time looking at the resources. And again, sleep early. Don't stress out too much, and pray. Seriously, yes, I believe we have to pray. There are things that are out of our control. We have to do our part, prepare, study, but the rest, the things that we have no control of, we leave that to God. That could be your health, internet problems, weather conditions, or things like that. So yes, do not forget to pray. Okay, internet availability, yes, that's important. So let's pray that there won't be any problem with your internet connection, with your device, that everything will be smooth. Okay, and eat peanuts. Why peanuts? Peanuts in my country we eat chocolates before the exam. It helps with the memory. Okay, 4 p.m. on February 3. And you have 24 hours to complete it, so enough time. So don't stress out too much. And like I said, do not wait till the very last time to submit your work, just to avoid any connection problem. Okay, what else? Okay, there, no more questions. So once again, thank you for attending our webinar today. We wish you all the best. We wish you good luck. We hope that you will all pass this exam, Unit IG1 and Unit IG2. Again, if you have any questions, you still have time till February 3, till February 5 to send us your question. But don't contact us during the exam. That is very important. It's a malpractice. We are not allowed to talk to you on the day of the exam. Okay, but NEBOSH, I think send an email or something where you can contact them directly in case you have any problems during the exam. So we thank you. We wish you all the best and see you once you get your certificate. See you once you inform us that you passed the exam. We don't want to see you for retakes. We want to see you once you inform us that yes, you did it and we believe you can do it. So good luck, everyone. Jovi, anything else?
Thank you, Ma'am. Alice, thank you.
Thank you. So that's it.
Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Thank you, Ma'am.
Is there any pictures, Jovi, or not today?
Yeah, take the picture.
Mandatory class picture. So if you can please open your camera, we wanna have, we wanna see you. Yeah, nice. Oh, and I will see you again for the closing interview, by the way.
Just a moment, Mom. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Okay, one more. One more, Mom. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, Ma'am.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.